Thanks everybody for coming. I'm Jamie Weintraub, one of the event managers at Chainlink Labs. I'm very pleased to have our two guests, Mark Richardson, who's the head of research at Bancor, and Paul Erlanger, who's in growth and product growth, at dYdX. Right, we're gonna have a little panel discussion, community-focused DeFi, and I guess I'll just kick it off, right? Cool. So the first question is more general, right? DeFi has really grown rapidly over the last couple of years, and fundamentally, where do you feel that growth has come from?
Okay, yeah, that's a super interesting question. I think that there are probably two sort of fundamental reasons why DeFi has grown the way that it has. The first, and probably the easiest to understand, is just looking at the audience. Who gets a 0.01% interest rate on their savings account with their current bank? Quick, yeah, okay. So I think this is kind of the number one consumer-facing reason why DeFi has been so attractive, right? Because in general, 10x that or 100x that in DeFi is considered a bad return. And so, yeah, I think that for the space, that has been one of the primary drivers for the users to use these products. But I think that in the beginning, the reason why DeFi was able to sort of establish itself at all was because there were a lot of people that were, let's say, skeptical, dubious, that they can continue to entrust the world's financial system to the centralized entities that created it. And so I do think something like the 2008 global financial crisis was an excellent sort of seeding event for people to sort of start critically looking at how the financial system is organized and say, well, you know what, even if I'm not going to be making a great return, I'm going to, help to establish these DeFi protocols in the first place. And so it turns out that was short-lived, and once DeFi, sort of had sufficient momentum, that it was very easy for us to generate returns that were competitive with centralized sources. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think you pretty much covered it. Can you guys hear me? Oh yeah, that's why you're holding it so close. Yeah, originally it kind of rested on fundamental tenets of just kind of against the traditional financial system, right? Democratization, consensus protocols, even Robinhood, who kind of like was the Robin Hood of finance, got into that whole fiasco with Wall Street Bets. You still have to provide certain disclosures when you're onboarding to their platform. But with decentralized finance, especially the ones that don't require KYC, that operate pretty much globally, you can onboard, right, have your capital non-custodial. And that's great, right? Because there are a lot of people in these traditional financial markets in Asia, Africa, even parts of Europe that don't have access to this traditional financial system. And then kind of how Mark brought up, the yields skyrocketed, right? And there's a lot of people in these other countries who don't really, who aren't onboarding necessarily because of the tenets of DeFi, but just because it's an exciting new world and product and kind of like the breaking edge of tech. So I think those are pretty much the two main factors.
Thank you. And Mark, you mentioned the dubiousness of centralized entities and governments, and it's hard to not pay attention to what was going on in Canada yesterday, and It's easy to piggyback on that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for anyone that doesn't know what that reference is, in Canada, a new policy has just been approved by the government that allows Canadian banks to freeze any and all customer accounts without warning and without justification. And so this is now law, right? This is just a fact of life now. If you're living in Canada, that your bank can decide to not relinquish your funds back to you, and they never have to explain to you why they've made that decision. I think I don't understand why we tolerate this, and I think that blockchains, Bitcoin was largely inspired by this kind of tyranny. And I think Ethereum was the natural continuation of that, and we're starting to see, the third generation, and even you might say 3.5 or fourth generation blockchains continue in that tradition. But DeFi is kind of agnostic to the specific technology that it's running on. There are really only three axiomatic, financial components, which is like risk transfer, exchange, and borrowing and lending. And as long as we can create systems that allow those components to be rearranged and construct whatever the financial instruments we need as a civilization to function, it doesn't really matter what blockchain we're on. But I do think that what we're doing in the speed and efficiency and prowess that we have in achieving these kinds of technologies, it is a huge threat to what to what governments and banks are currently doing. And I think that some of the, let's say, the knee-jerk reactions, right? Some of the more fear-laden articles that we're seeing from journalists over the last 12 months, if anything, are a testament to the fact that they are worried that these products are likely to dethrone the incumbent authorities. I don't know if you think that that's too hyperbolic, but I'm interested to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. I think a lot of traditional media is like turning a cheek now, and I think a lot of the news is getting a lot more positive, specifically like kind of just surrounding like communities. And I think like NFTs, for example, are a great way for like retail to get involved. I know we have a question coming up with that, but I think as more and more people start to eat the red pill and dive into crypto and like get to onboard through all the technicalities and like difficulties as it is to onboard into crypto, the traditional media will also kind of turn a cheek as well.
Great. So each of your protocols are going through a change this year. You're releasing Bancor v3, dYdX v4. So I want to give you guys an opportunity to shed a little bit of light on what those changes look like. We'll start with Paul. dYdX is going fully decentralized. My core question is, what are the fundamental differences that will bring to dYdX, and how community-driven is that decision now, and will that make things in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely community driven. Pretty much the overarching point is the goal is to fully decentralize the protocol. So as a little bit of background, dYdX is a full order book decentralized DEX. So we're fully decentralized exchange, kind of like if you're going to trade on FTX or Coinbase Pro, which are fully centralized. You can place limit orders on different market prices. The difference is that we're completely non-custodial. So we build smart contracts where you kind of deposit your money and lock it in, and then you like take open interest into whatever it is, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc., and then you pull that interest out. The thing is that, so recently I've been much more focused at dYdX on business development, like onboarding hedge funds. And these traditional market players, what they like to see, and the reason why they like decentralized exchanges so much, is because they're super efficient, right? Like they're using APIs and trading at like thousands of transactions per second, and current layer 1 blockchains just can't handle that, right? That's why like all these DEXs are built on layer 2. And there's some being built on Serum on Solana right now, but they're kind of janky and not really working. So there's no really true efficient on-chain order book right now. Right now, dYdX's order book is off-chain. All settlement happens on-chain, which market makers love, and that's the reason why our volume is so high. But kind of the next version of the protocol is we released our token, which is a governance token. And pretty much right now we're starting to onboard all new decisions to governance. So token voters kind of make all the decisions. But in the next version of the protocol, they're going to have full control. So like where the revenues for the protocol go, like the whole community will decide. All future asset onboardings, the community will decide. And we're exploring a bunch of different options on where we're going to build it right now. But it's looking to come out about the end of this year, maybe Q1 next year. And we're pretty excited about it. So yeah, completely community driven. We hope to be like the first completely decentralized DEX, non-custodial, and yeah, so that's where the next version of the protocol is headed.
Thank you. All right, Mark, for you in V3 with Bancor, there are a number of big changes, right? I could dig into a lot of things. I was happy to watch your keynote at Decentral Miami, and I want to dig into what you refer to as both Omni and Infinity pools, and how do you think that will offer greater access to new people onboarding into DeFi?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it's a sort of a double question. So I think to answer it, we need to talk a little bit about version 2.1. I think, at least just briefly. Actually, I want to quickly sort of survey the audience. We got a lot of Chainlink. Put your hands up if you're a Chainlink enthusiast, right? I imagine most of us are. Okay, who's familiar with Bancor, or at least or has used Bancor before? Okay, Not too bad, actually, probably about 30%. Okay, so in Bancor version 2.1, you can provide liquidity with a single token. Okay, and this is in stark contrast to a lot of the other DEXs on Ethereum, or actually in any blockchain environment. So something like, this isn't taking a jab at anyone in particular, but something like SushiSwap, if you want to provide liquidity with the Link token, you are required to provide an equal value in ETH at the same time. And what we have found in sort of our market research is that Chainlink enthusiasts generally refuse to hold cryptocurrencies other than Link. And I think that for the majority of you, I hope that that sort of strikes a nerve. And then, for Bancor as a liquidity product, we really want to be able to cater to people with precisely that leaning. If you don't want to hold an equal proportion of ETH in your portfolio, you shouldn't have to. And so what Bancor designed was an AMM that allows you to provide true Link liquidity, single-sided. However, the problem with doing that is that you take on a potential downside risk. This is true of all AMMs, which is referred to as impermanent loss. Who has heard of impermanent loss before? Wonderful. All right, our message is finally getting across. So Bancor also refused to accept that impermanent loss should be something that users have to tolerate. And so we invented impermanent loss insurance, and that meant that that Bancor was, I think, the first protocol to annex both the risk transfer and exchange components of those economic axioms that I referred to before. And so this means that Chainlink participants can just provide Link, and they're always exposed to the upside, and they're never exposed to to any losses from Link diverting from the rest of the ecosystem. Problem is, in order to do that, in version 2.1, the Bancor community had to decide precisely what insurance risk they would allow. And this meant that the pools were capped at a certain level, and this has bottlenecked the TVL of our protocol, right? Deliberately bottlenecked it. We can't, as an insurance provider, we can't just insure an arbitrary amount of capital. In Bancor version 3, we can insure an arbitrary amount of capital, right? It's no longer the case that you have to wait for space to be opened up in the pool. We have found a way to accept an infinite amount of liquidity and still be able to offer the same assurances that users are currently enjoying on version 2.1. So that's the infinity pool component of Bancor version 3, which is there are no longer any pool caps. If you want to provide a token, we're not going to stop you. The other component is the Omnipool. With Bancor, we use the BNT token as the universal numeraire, right? It's the only reason why, if you're trading, for example, ETH to Link, or Link to Aave, or Link to DAI, that the protocol knows exactly what the exchange rate should be, right? This is the beauty of the algorithm, is that there is no market maker there that determines the price of something. The market itself will determine the price of it. But in order to do that, you need something that's constant across the entire protocol, right? Sort of like how the US dollar is constant across the rest of the global economy. In our protocol, it's the BNT token itself. And that has meant that when you're performing a trade between two assets, there generally are two trades, right? For example, Link into BNT, and then BNT into ETH, right? If you're exiting from a Link position. Or if you're entering a Link position from DAI into BNT, and then BNT into Link. And that meant that there's always this kind of two swap component as a requirement for using the network, and that meant that gas is high, right, compared to our competitors. So what we found a way is, in version 3 is to abstract that away so that the pool always has these quasi one-hop trades. If you are buying Link with ETH, you send ETH into the protocol and it sends Link back. That's it, right? The BNT component is still there. It's still required for the universal numeraire, but there's no longer a token transfer, and that means that there's a huge gas savings. And so we think that this is going to alleviate a relatively significant component of the gas problem that's facing us with regards to growing our volume.
Great. My next question really goes very well with that. You sort of touched on it to a certain extent. My question is, right, so most people in this room are probably very native to crypto. They understand how to use DeFi applications, although for people outside the space, there is still a bit of a barrier to entry. The DeFi applications are getting shinier, they're getting prettier, although for someone who's new to the space, there's still a lot of I guess red flags when you have to set up a MetaMask, you see gas fees, you have to understand private keys. How are both of your applications trying to make it easier for new onboarders who have a very rudimentary understanding of the space, access and an easier time to get involved in DeFi?
Cool, yeah. I think there's two aspects to this. There's one, aesthetics, and then functionality. In terms of functionality, it's just really confusing to onboard to any DEX right now because a lot of them don't have integrated fiat on-ramps. So that's something we're definitely looking into. So that will have a huge savings, right? For like we're launching a mobile app in a few months, right? Specifically on mobile, if you can kind of just like go onto the dYdX app, deposit fiat right there without having to offboard to like, I don't know, Coinbase or something, then switch to USDC, bring it to MetaMask, then link that to a dYdX wallet, it would be a huge savings, right? And then aesthetics. So that's something we pride ourselves on. We have hopefully, I think, and hopefully everyone else will think, like a beautiful DEX. So, and just like streamlined, easy to use, pretty obvious, like where you see kind of all your information about insurance, how much risk you're taking on based on leverage, your asset pools, etc. And then creating just general educational content, because dYdX targets pro traders because it's a full order book DEX. You use APIs. You can trade on our GUI, but also mostly APIs. So it's pretty confusing to like the average retail trader. So a large part of it is kind of just us creating videos and on social, just creating content for the community. So the kind of on ramp onto our platform becomes a lot easier.
Yeah. So I think there's two ways that DeFi becomes inaccessible. One is conceptually. And I think that by having talks like this one and telling people about what it is that we do and why it's important, I think that helps to erode that away a little bit. And so with Bancor version 2.1, that was really sort of core to the mission, which is, do you know what impermanent loss is? Okay, fine. You don't need to. If you provide liquidity on Bancor, you have no risk, right? That's it. Your funds are safe. It should feel like interacting with an online savings account. I've said in multiple interviews before that I consider like a lot of the DeFi products to feel a lot like the online high interest bank accounts of like the early 2000s. I'm not sure if anyone remembers these, but it was things like ING Direct from I think from Denmark, and Asander Group from New Zealand, Ubank from Australia. These products that were like, well, do we even need a branch, right? Do you even need an ATM card? Can we cut all of those costs and then just compound those earnings back on the user? And DeFi in many ways is like that. It's like, but instead of cutting out just the branch, you like cut out the entire banking system, right? But it's the same idea, right? That efficiency means that we can give users better returns. And I think that's really the message that we want to peddle, which is if you know how to use a high interest online banking account, this is the same, except instead of using internet, it uses blockchains, but that's it. There's that component, and I think that education is helping to resolve that. Then there's the technical component. And this is important because things like MetaMask and getting your hardware wallet together and using these things in a secure way, there's all of that, which is problematic, but I would say not a huge hurdle. But then when you've finally learned to do those things, then interacting with the protocol can be difficult. And I would say that even within our community, the UX, right, the user interface that they are asking for, it's like, can you make it more DeFi, right? I want to see more numbers and more tables, right? And I want it to be all of the stuff that I see when I go and use these other protocols. Whereas internally in the team, it's like, well, don't you want it to be sort of more online banking-like? Like maybe regular people, when they want to come to blockchain and use it for the first time, they're expecting to see a pretty minimalist presentation. And so I think with Bancor version 3, we're trying to strike that balance between the two, where you still get that kind of DeFi experience of getting to see exactly what the protocol's doing and how it's doing it. But you have this beautiful minimalist presentation for what your actual position is and what it's worth. And I think that in the future, it could be possible to even branch these to have multiple front ends. So that if you want the full DeFi, degen sort of, skin, that one of those front ends would be available to you. And if your grandmother wants to use the protocol for the first time, you use the grandmother UI, right? That looks exactly like their online savings account would.
Yeah, I would imagine it's a bit difficult to balance those two, right? You have your community, you have your natives that have certain demands, and then you also want a capacity to on-ramp new users. Okay, I'm going to take things in a slightly different direction. I think it was Paul mentioned this earlier. NFTs have been very hot over the last year and a half. There's been a big boom in the space. There are certainly some intersections between DeFi and NFTs. I know that dYdX, you have your Hedgie project. I was complimenting Mark earlier about they released they did a drop yesterday of condoms protecting you from impermanent loss. I would recommend anyone check that. It's quite funny. I guess my question is, do you view this as NFTs more as an opportunity or a fad?
Yeah. Maybe a little of both, but I think probably opportunity. I think there is some longevity to it in terms of utility, at least. I think dYdX kind of saw it in two lights. One, as a promotion and a way to give back to our community, right? Everything's community driven. So we made sure like the airdrop for our project went for like governance users and traders and a way to kind of like pay them back. But then also like completely utility on the platform, right? Like we're creating profiles on the dYdX platform where people can like track trading strategies of each other. And then kind of like their profile picture will be their Hedgie NFT, right? And then on top of that, you get like a trading fee discount for holding this NFT. So I think the longevity is more in the utility of these NFTs, and then also kind of like we mentioned before, getting most of retail to eat the red pill of crypto, right? Because it's something like really easy to understand. It's something that like is really like nice to the eye and like really fun to kind of talk to your friends about. So the longevity comes from like one, like the short-term promotion, but then also the long-term utility of these products.
Yeah, so who owns an NFT, by the way? Can I get a quick show of hands? Amazing, okay? It's clearly here to stay, right? That was the majority of the room. I'm surprised. I mean, congratulations, right? But okay, let's think about it. I think that when NFTs first appeared, the reason why they caught on so quickly is that they're so intuitive, right? I own this thing and there's only one of it, right? Or there's only 5 of it, and I'm one of those lucky individuals that has this thing. And I can sell it for whatever I want, right? It's not something like Bitcoin where it's like some chart on the internet tells you what your Bitcoin is worth. You get to decide what your NFT is worth. And if no one's buying it from you, whatever, right? Maybe you'll get a buyer one day or something. It feels more like, auctioning your house or something like that. People get it, and they like this idea that they have they have agency over what this thing is worth. Whereas with Bitcoin, it's like you sometimes feel like the victim of the market or something. Or like even when Bitcoin goes up, it's like, I don't know if I deserved that, right? The market just did what it did, and I am just a passive participant in it. But with NFTs, you're an active participant. And I think that that just resonates with people. I've often wondered, whether or not the criticism against NFTs, like as, JPEGs that are worth $800 million or whatever Ether rocks are selling for these days, is actually on point. I want to go back. I want to find some art historian or something to tell me when it was the first time that art became a collectible, asset, like a financial asset. Because it used to be that you needed to be an artist to be valuable, and you would like paint someone's portrait or paint, the Sistine Chapel, but the painting itself was worthless. It was just a way for you to show off how much money you have by, by hiring the best artist to paint your thing. And there would have been at some point this transition where the actual thing itself started to become worth money. And even now, looking at it, it's like, how do I even know what's worth money and what's not, right? There are some garbage paintings that are worth, more than most houses in New York, right? There are some really terrific paintings that are worth $10 and that are hanging in the cafes in New York, right? It's difficult to work out how humans value things. But I do think that it's intuitive and that people are kind of raised knowing how this kind of component works, and that's why that's been so effective. But there's another component to NFTs that have, I think, a much more a much more significant or a much more profound utility in blockchains, but are much less intuitive. And this is for anything that is non-fungible, right? For anything that doesn't have, you know, a JPEG attached to it, right? But exists for a certain point in time or for a certain length of time and for a certain value for a certain individual. Things like mortgages could be NFTs, right? Things like options could be, and in fact are already NFTs, right? Options trades. There could also be insurance policies that are NFTs. There could be airline tickets that are NFTs, right? And that application of NFTs, I think, is going to be a lot less hypey, right? We're not going to see these kinds of things worth, you know, being traded for $800 million and being, you know, featured on the front of magazine covers. But I think the potential impact that it would have on the world economy will be many times greater than what we're seeing the NFTs currently being sold for.
Yeah, on the point you were saying that at some point there had to have been a market for these paintings that weren't particularly great, but they were decided that they're worth, you know, X amount of $1 million. I did a panel like this a couple weeks ago with a project that does NFT contracts for in real life trading cards and the Pokemons and sports cards, and it's the same thing, right? You have, at some point, Pokemon was a game for kids, and then it all of a sudden became, if you have that rare Charizard, it's worth, you know, several hundreds of thousands of dollars. Same for comics, sports cards, and et cetera. To take things in more of a macro direction, is there any areas where you see a potential for significant expansion for either of your applications or for the space at large?
So did you say any alias?
Excuse me, significant expansion.
Oh, okay. Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm sorry, do you mind if I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, so just recently I did an interview with Phantom on their YouTube channel. I've done an AMA with Avalanche. We've got one coming up with Polygon. The Bancor version 3 protocol is designed to be sufficiently lightweight that it can be adapted to any blockchain. So I want to emphasize any blockchain. It's a lot of our community members in particular are under the impression that it has to be EVM compatible. That's not true. We can go to, you know, we can go to something like Solana, which is a Rust environment. We could go to something like Polkadot on Substrate if we really wanted to. Really, anything that any environment that's good, that has you know, liquidity problems, tokens that want to be traded, liquidity providers that want to be protected from IL and provide single-sided liquidity. We can service all of those needs. The only question is, where do you go, right? There's only a certain amount of developer bandwidth that you have. I think a lot of people think that it's about, you know, just making a decision and hitting return on the keyboard and suddenly your thing deploys there. But we have other things to consider, right? Like, how is that blockchain environment going to govern itself? Do we have a separate DAO for that deployment? What assets on that chain would we be comfortable insuring, right? Some blockchains are riskier than others. You know, like I think, for example, something like BSC, there are some great assets on there, but there are some really risky assets on there that we don't necessarily want to be insuring. For something like Polygon, it's got a lot of the same stuff, right, that Ethereum has. So it might be sort of a natural transition to move on to something sort of cheaper and faster. Whereas on Solana, we might even need to bootstrap an entirely new community there that are familiar with the assets that are, and projects that are on Solana. But yes, absolutely. I think that it is way past due that Bancor get off of Ethereum and onto something slightly more accessible. I think every day that passes, Ethereum is becoming more and more sort of a whale chain, right? I do think that it's going to be this sort of de facto financial authority within blockchains for the foreseeable future, just because of its security and network effects are currently are uncontested. But if you are trying to reach this mass market and you do want to bring on people that can't afford $1,000 a transaction, then we do need to branch out. And we are considering every and all possibilities. And if one of these blockchains is your favorite, please feel free to message me and have a conversation with me about it. If you think that Bancor belongs on that chain in that environment, our community is extremely interested in entertaining those conversations.
Yeah, I think Mark's exactly right. I think the future's multi-chain, and interoperability between these blockchains is going to be necessary, right? in like Web 2, that wasn't necessarily the case. There was the internet HTTP protocol that everyone uses. But in blockchain, while Ethereum will kind of be the sheriff, I think that all these other blockchains, there will be interoperability between them, and there won't be one that wins. So expansion of protocols to these other blockchains will be key. Probably host a hub on one and then kind of either have a blockchain, something like Cosmos or something like Polygon that kind of allows interoperability with these other blockchains, or just kind of build the product on the other blockchain. And I think that's true for across all of DeFi. Other expansion opportunities, I think the biggest one is going to be just kind of increasing the amount of retail traders that become comfortable with DeFi by either over time just kind of educating them by it, but then also like making the on-ramp to it easier, kind of as I discussed before. For dYdX specifically, our expansion opportunity with the V4 is kind of targeting two different markets. So one of them is kind of targeting retail, where so like we on daily average do like 5 times the volume of Uniswap. However, we have like 1/5, like 1/3 to 1/5 the daily active users, only because like all these hedge funds doing tons of volume come to dYdX because they're more sophisticated trading tools. But it's so much easier to use Uniswap, right? You just go on there and you swap one token for another. So educating these users on how to use dYdX sophisticatedly, but also risk-free, or like in more risk-averse manner. Nothing's, when you're holding open interest, is really ever risk-free, is one of like the keys for us. And then the other is just kind of like convincing some of these people that, or retail investors that use these centralized exchanges like Binance and FTX to take the red pill to DeFi, right? Like when dYdX was created, our goal is to become like the largest exchange in the world, not just the largest DEX, and that's going to require a lot of these retail traders to come from the centralized exchanges to the decentralized ones. Main reason being like the non-custodial nature, having stake in the platform, right? Like through governance and owning the tokens and making decisions. And like this ties directly into the conversations with NFTs, right? Like why is that valuable? Why is it valuable to have ownership? And I'm sure Mark will agree this because we both have decentralized platforms. It's like what Web3 allowed is like ownership to happen with the community, right? Like it's very obvious in the creator economy. The first wave of the creator economy was like, came with like Facebook and Instagram, where people for the first time were able to be creators and post content. Whereas before the internet, like there was no globalization. People just like, you had to be like an artist, or like word of mouth was the only way to spread the word. Then like, I guess like partnership, like YouTube came around, which allowed people to like partner with corporations, and like now like basically have advertising partners to make money. Then like the third wave of the creator economies were like creators monetize their own communities, right? Like they would like sell merchandise to their community, or they would maybe like offer like direct brand deals rather than sponsorships with YouTube. But the fourth wave of the creator economy, which also goes through like governance tokens on any DEX, is now the communities of the creators are also benefiting with the creators, right? Because they have ownership and stake in all these protocols. So I think like that's the main reason why decentralized finance will beat out any form of centralized finance in the future.
Great. At this point, I'd like to open the floor for Q&A, if that's all right with you two. I'm sure the audience will have much better questions to ask than myself. So I don't know if we're going to run a mic around, or you got it? Great. So if we could just get a raise of hand if you'd like to ask a question, and we'll bring a mic over to you.
Test. It's interesting to have both dYdX and Bancor here. It seems like your new versions are going to rely heavily on your communities. Do you think governance in its current form in DeFi is successful?
Go ahead.
Yes and no. I think that I think in terms of concentration, there's a lot of engagement, right, from like small groups and audiences. And the thing is that, and this should be true, but a lot of the pool of kind of people who are participating in DeFi governance is pretty small right now, right? So they're happening across the different protocols, and most of these people are kind of just like yield farming the tokens. So there's like a little bit of I guess like unhelpful like nature there, but in general, I think they're pretty successful, but I think there's tons of room for expansion. So I think like the room for expansion is more in size than kind of like getting people more passionate, because the passions that the communities that exist are very passionate. They're just kind of small right now.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. I guess it depends on how you define successful. I think that, for example, with Bancor, and when it went decentralized and launched its DAO in October of 2021, sorry, October of 2020, it was absolutely a priority to make sure that this was a fully decentralized, governance process. That it wasn't just a smokescreen to sort of protect the protocol from regulators, but that it was going to be a community-owned process, and it sort of represented the beginning of the full giving back the Bancor protocol to its community, because when Bancor was founded, it was a regulated exchange. It has a foundation that funds the protocol. And it has legal representatives and that sort of thing. But with Bancor version 3, it'll actually be the first time the protocol is 100% owned and operated by the DAO, and the foundation will have no ability to control it anymore. And I think that one of the reasons why we are so enthusiastic to do this is that the Bancor DAO is now among the most prolific in the space. I think we're the second most active DAO in existence. We're so a little over a year old, and something like 340 proposals now voted on chain. So I would call that successful. But is it perfect, right? Like, is it something that I'm satisfied that, am I going to become complacent that the DAO is good enough? No. I think that there needs to be a lot more. I think there's a lot of room to explore how DAOs can operate, right? At the moment, it's really just people put up proposals. Maybe there's some policy there about who can put up a proposal and who can't, who can vote and who can't, and that sort of thing. But I do wonder if there might be a better system where maybe like elected representatives of the DAO are entrusted with operating the protocol for fixed periods of time or something like that. And the reason for that is that as these protocols get much larger, as the risks get more and more difficult to understand, it's possible that your average community member may be taking on an unreasonable workload, right? Assessing all of these proposals and making a decision on them. And so having, the community itself generate individuals that it trusts with these, decisions is probably a better way to do it. And luckily, things already seem to be moving that way, right? Vote delegation is already a very successful technology, and community members are very, very good, I think, at identifying individuals that they think have the protocol's best interest at heart. So I do think it's working well, but I'm not satisfied that we're at optimum performance yet. But I think there's every reason to be enthusiastic, right, and be impressed by how well things are going so far.
Quick follow-up with Paul. dYdX is it also on Optimism? What other?
Yeah, so right now we operate on Starkware. They built a custom matching engine for us. It's called StarkX, and there are two other DeFi protocols that have similar ones. Starkware just launched their mainnet, StarkNet. For V4, we're exploring different options. We kind of come to a conclusion on where we're going to build. Can't really give much information on that now, but the announcement's going to be soon. But yeah, we're pretty excited for it. And yeah, the goal, once again, is to fully decentralize our order book, because there are some centralized features with the current StarkX protocol.
So governance-wise, when you guys start to expand to other chains, how does the governance token work? Does it care which chain it's on? Any vote that is passed affects your protocol on every chain? Or is it going to be kind of divorced from one another, where certain tokens on one chain kind of vote for the dYdX platform, and then people on ETH vote for what happens on that? You know what I'm asking?
Yeah. No, that's a fantastic question.
Figure out as well.
Yeah.
How does a token holder on AVAX impact the same project that might be on another chain?
So yeah, I think it's a little different in the sense that we plan to fully wind down the V3 of the protocol once V4 comes out. So there will be a one-to-one correlation with whatever ERC20 token is, and then whatever the token is on the new protocol. So nothing will really change there, except the structure of the governance, right? But that's one of the really important questions that we're answering. Yeah.
Hey guys, so I have another multi-chain question. So you both run liquidity pools, I guess. So what really is the future of liquidity pools existing on multiple different chains? Because really we want deep pools, right? So the price doesn't change too much. So does it really make sense that we're going to have multiple L1s, multiple L2s, or with an ETH DAI pool, for example?
Yeah, so dYdX is a full order book DEX. So we're not exactly the same as a liquidity pool model. We do have staking pools where people can earn yields in dYdX on USDC and dYdX itself, but I guess it's better for you to answer.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I just want to point out. So dYdX and Bancor they're not really competing in the sense that the technology is similar, right? So dYdX uses predominantly off-chain liquidity and private market makers who are settling trades on-chain, and this is still preferential to anything that like Binance or Coinbase is doing, because you still have that that transparency and auditability that the market makers are behaving, in a way that is conducive to supporting healthy markets. Whereas Bancor is a liquidity pool-based model, which means the liquidity is already there, and it comes from a decentralized source. So in general, off-chain liquidity sources are generally very, very large, but very small numbers of people controlling it. Whereas on-chain liquidity sources can be, they can still be quite large, but it's crowdsourced, right? Lots of people contributing it. But your question really is, how does this look in a multi-chain ecosystem? So something like dYdX, it's really not a problem because the liquidity is already off-chain, right? And so it's really just what blockchain do they want to settle that transaction on, and where are the traders and that sort of thing. With something like Bancor, it's like the liquidity needs to actually be on the chain to begin with. And so there's a couple of ways that we can talk about it. One is, are the same tokens likely to be present or required on lots of different chains, right? And I think the answer to this is some will, right? But they're already pretty ubiquitous, right? So things like ETH, right? Of course, Ethereum has a stupid amount of ETH on it, but you can also find Ethereum on Avalanche in large quantities. You can find it on Polygon in large quantities, and there's really no sort of lack of ETH stakers to keep that liquid. Certainly, I would not say that it's illiquid, such that price discovery of the ETH token becomes problematic. But maybe maybe you've got a DAO token that is relatively concentrated on Ethereum. Because that's where your project is. So now the question is, do you even want liquidity on Polygon, right? Do you want liquidity on Avalanche? Because it's unlikely that people that are wanting to either buy that token for its intrinsic use case or trade it because they're speculating on its price are going to be present on those other chains. So I do think that, like for Bancor, the liquidity pools that we have on Ethereum are very, very unlikely to be the same liquidity pools that we have on Avalanche if we go there, or Phantom in particular, right, which has its own thriving ecosystem and its own tokens. And it could be that people want to bring those tokens from Ethereum to Phantom because the gas prices are lower, or they like the finality of the transactions is better. And so yeah, it could be that all of the Aave liquidity providers decide, screw Ethereum, let's go to Phantom and we'll create our liquidity pool there, right? And that's fine if they want to do that, and that will fragment the liquidity. But I don't see that coming to fruition. I think that all of the ETH native projects will likely have the overwhelming majority of their liquidity on Ethereum, and the Polygon native projects will have the overwhelming majority of their liquidity on Polygon, and that will kind of fragment it. So now the question is, fine, what if I want to trade an ETH native asset for a Polygon native asset, right? Because do I have to go through the bridge every time or something like that? And so there are two possible answers to this. One you'll be excited to hear is something like CCIP, right, which would allow for for transactions to be settled on two chains simultaneously, maybe, right? The details of how something like this could actually work is still coming to light, but it has been teased that Chainlink's cross-chain interoperability protocol can be used for precisely this use case. Without that, we can actually still use something like a hybrid between dYdX and Bancor, where an off-chain liquidity source settles the transaction on both chains simultaneously. And this is what the Celsius X product is designed to achieve. And so Celsius is already, a pretty close collaborator with Bancor. It's, if anyone is a Celsius, user, one of the ways that Celsius generates yield on your tokens is by depositing them into Bancor's protocol. And so, we know each other quite well, and, we have spoken previously about the fact that we can settle transactions cross-chain using something like off-chain liquidity provided by Celsius users. So there's no one way to do it, and we have to kind of wait to see how these products evolve and what users' expectations are. But we're kind of, I would say we're already spoiled for choice. We just have to wait for the industry to sort of settle down on what the right solution is.
Let's do one more.
Hi. Hello. So I was just wondering about like the tokenomics of each project and how you guys decide on the tokenomics.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm happy to go more granular in the meet and greet after, because it goes to a lot of different players. But more generally, how dYdX, so we did an airdrop, right, for users of our V2 protocol, which was a margin lending spot trading platform. Now we're fully perpetual based, built on layer 2. So there's continued, so there's a treasury, right? And we're trying to deploy the treasury as well as we can by promoting projects where the community can create blogs, etc., and then allocate the treasury. And I think that's a huge crime in DeFi, projects underutilizing their treasury. And I think it's a huge expansion opportunity. So that's one way. But then the ongoing rewards programs, right? So how dYdX offers rewards in terms of tokenized rewards, dYdX, is we split it into epochs, which are 28-day periods, where both liquidity providers, which are the liquidity providers Mark mentioned, like the hedge funds that offer massive amounts of capital on the order book, earn liquidity every month. We used a model that was actually developed by the CME for their futures exchange, which takes into account a few different things: uptime of liquidity, the spread that they have, and then also the depth they're providing on the books. So every 28 days, the market makers are competing to earn these tokenized rewards in terms of liquidity. Then on top of that, we offer traders, so takers, people who are taking liquidity. We also offer them rewards. I think 25% of the total tokens are going to traders on the platform. So every 28 days, the traders who are paying the most fees and having the most open interest on the platform also earn this tokenized reward. And that will be for the next 5 years. So we're trying to get hopefully sufficient liquidity and sufficient usage of the protocol within the next 5 years. I mean, the token only launched about 6 months ago. So it's on an ongoing basis being distributed. Besides that, there are 2 other mechanisms which we distribute tokens, and those are our 2 staking pools. So the biggest problem in DeFi, or one of the problems, probably not the biggest one, is that these market makers, they come on the platform, but FTX and Binance are able to outcompete us because they can offer loans to these market makers to supply more liquidity on the platform, right? And we're like, how do we do that in a decentralized manner, because we don't have sufficient capital on the balance sheet to give risk to these market makers, right? So we created a liquidity staking pool where actually users can stake USDC, which is lent out as uncollateralized zero interest loans to market makers. And the safety net there is that full disclosures have to be made on the forum. And then we actually reward users who stake that USDC dYdX. And then there's also a safety staking pool where users can stake dYdX to earn dYdX. So there's a bunch of different mechanisms in which users can kind of earn dYdX over time. Right now, it's purely a governance token. However, when the next version of the protocol does get released, kind of all decisions for where the revenue of the protocols go will go to the token holders, right? So yeah, it's a governance token that has the utility of also giving fee discounts on the exchange, but that's kind of a little bit of a framework of how we distribute it over time.
Yeah, it's a really terrific question. I think tokenomics design is, it's an emerging field, and there are a lot of hot opinions, I think, in the space about what makes sense and what doesn't. but we're still kind of learning what these things are. If you want to learn about how these kinds of conversations are going, I strongly recommend joining the Token Engineering Academy. They're actually trying to finance a bachelor's degree for different universities around the world to adopt in cryptocurrency and tokenomics design, which is super interesting. That's moving ahead, by the way. This is how fast cryptocurrency is moving. Okay, so with regards to BNT, the best way I can answer your question is to remind you that when we launched in 2017, that we were considered a fully regulatory compliant project, and we are still. And so everything that we decide to do needs to be observing securitization laws. And so BNT is specifically designed to be a non-security, right? It is so the Bancor Foundation is working together with the Swiss government, and so we're regulated by FINMA, and that extends across some of the other parts of the EU. We're setting up a legal base in the US as well to help us navigate the SEC. But everything that BNT does and is we make sure that it's legal. And so that's absolutely the first priority, which is that neither the protocol nor its token holders can be accused of breaking the law. That's, as long as we're on that level, then everything else underneath it is worth exploring. The BNT as a utility token is special because the entire protocol won't work without BNT, right? There are a host of projects where if you remove the token, the protocol would continue to function as is. And therefore, it raises the question, like, why does this token exist? Whereas with Bancor, if you remove the BNT token, the protocol completely ceases to function. And so its value proposition is innate, right? It doesn't have to be explained, or, it doesn't, well, maybe it has to be explained, but it doesn't have to be abstracted, right? It just is required. And the way that results in things like earning potential and things like that, the value that you realize from utilizing the token, is intrinsic to how the protocol works. And so that I would say is the most important component of our tokenomics design, right? Is first, are we legally compliant? Yes, in all jurisdictions, by the way. Good. Now what can we do with it? And so the utility token component is exactly how we designed it, so that we're in the legal green. But we're not a DAO token. BNT is not a voting token, right? It's not, you can't stake it for voting rights. You actually have to put it inside the protocol and stake it against the finances of the system in order to generate the Bancor voting token. So Bancor is unique, I think, in the sense that it is a proof of stake governance system. If you are making bad decisions as a governance member, your own finances are at stake, right? So this is the disincentive that we have against bad behavior, and this is what is protecting our DAO against things like governance hacks and other things, where bad actors can try and monopolize, the voting majority in order to, perform a nefarious task, because they have to actually risk their own capital in order to participate in governance. Our system has become pretty robust, and so I'd say that this is, a relatively new but equally important component of our tokenomics design.
All right, great. I think that's a good spot to end things up. Could we get a round of applause for Mark and Paul? So everyone feel free to hang out, grab some food, drinks. Before we do that, I do want to say that we will be back here on March 3rd for a conversation with a project called Autonomy. And we're discussing about how they're utilizing Chainlink smart contracts to provide provable insurance for freight. It's a very interesting project, and I hope to see many of you there again. Thanks.
Can I get another round of applause for our lovely host?
Thanks, everyone.